Close your eyes and let time dissolve around you like morning mist over a Nordic fjord. It is the year 842, and the world is younger, wilder, and infinitely more dangerous than anything you have ever known. The sun rises reluctantly over the jagged coastline of what will one day be called Norway, casting long shadows across waters so dark they mirror the pewter sky above. You stand on the rocky shore of a settlement that has no name in any language you would recognize. A cluster of wooden halls huddled against the elements like wounded animals seeking shelter. The air carries the sharp bite of salt and seaweed, mingled with the earthier sense of wood smoke, leather, and something else. Something primal and raw that speaks of lives lived on the very edge of survival. This is the world of the Norsemen, the people history will remember as Vikings. But forget everything you think you know about horned helmets and Hollywood barbarians. The reality is far more complex, far more human, and infinitely more fascinating than any legend could ever be. The longships rest at anchor in the protected harbor, their curved prows cutting elegant silhouettes against the dawn sky. These are not the dragon-headed monsters of myth, but sleek predators of wood and iron, each one a masterpiece of engineering that represents a generations of accumulated knowledge about wind, wave, and the unforgiving northern seas. Listen. Can you hear it? The creak of rope and timber, the gentle lap of waves against hulls worn smooth by countless voyages, the snort of horses in their stalls, the lowing of cattle in their pens, and underneath it all, the steady rhythm of daily life beginning once again in this harsh land where survival is never guaranteed, and every dawn might be your last. You're about to become one of them, a Viking raider, not because you were born to it, though bloodline matters here, but because circumstances and choice and the inexorable currents of history are about to sweep you up and carry you across seas dark as winter nights, to shores where gold glitters in monastery treasuries and slaves can be taken with the swing of an axe. But first, you must understand what made them what they were, what forged these farmers and fishermen into the terror of three continents, what drove them from their homes to seek fortune and glory in lands they had never seen, among peoples who would curse their names for centuries to come. The answer begins here, in the smoky halls and wind-swept fields of Scandinavia, where winter lasts half the year and survival depends as much on cunning as on courage, where the old gods still walk among mortals and every man's worth is measured by his deeds, not his birth. Welcome to the world of the Vikings. Welcome to your new life. The hall around you stretches into smoky shadows, its wooden beams blackened by years of hearth fires and oil lamps. This is your home, though the word carries different weight here than it might in softer lands. Home is not just shelter. It is fortress, sanctuary, and the beating heart of a community bound together by blood, oath, and shared struggle against an often hostile world. You wake as you always do, before the sun, roused by the stirring of animals and the quiet movements of women tending the central fire. The air is thick with the smells of your life, wood smoke and wet wool, the sharp tang of fermented fish hanging in the rafters, the earthier sense of cattle dung and human sweat. These are not unpleasant odors. They are the perfume of survival, each one telling you that your household lives another day. Your bed is nothing more than a raised platform covered with furs and rough woven blankets, but it is warm and dry, which makes it more luxurious than anything a monk or peasant might know. Around you, other members of the household are beginning their own daily rituals. Your wife, if you're married, tends to the children and the never-ending task of keeping everyone fed. If you are young and unmarried, you sleep with the other warriors in the hall, your weapons always within arm's reach. The morning meal is simple but substantial. Thick porridge made from barley or oats. Perhaps some preserved meat if the hunting has been good. Bread that tastes of smoke and grain and the calloused hands that kneaded it. You wash it down with ale, weak ale, for water cannot always be trusted. And even children drink the mild brew that sustains life in these northern lands. But even as you break your fast, your mind is elsewhere. It is early spring and the ice has broken in the harbor. The longships are being prepared for the season's first voyage, and every man worthy of the name feels the pull of the horizon. This is the season of raiding, when young warriors prove their worth and established men add to their reputation and their wealth. You step outside into the pale morning light and breathe deeply of air so clean it makes your lungs ache. The settlement spreads around you, perhaps 50 souls in all, from graying elders to children barely old enough to walk. Your fields stretch toward the forest, where barley and oats struggle to grow in soil that is more rock than earth. Your cattle graze in meadows that will be buried under snow for half the year. This is why men go Viking, not from bloodlust or savage nature, but from the simple, brutal mathematics of survival. The land can support only so many people, and when the harvest fails, or the winter runs long, or the cattle sicken and die, someone must find another way to live. That way lies across the sea, in the monasteries and trading towns of warmer lands, where silver gleams in church treasuries, and slaves can be taken to work your fields and tend your animals. You feel the weight of your axe at your belt, the familiar pressure of iron against your hip. It is not a weapon of war, not yet. It is a tool, like the hammer at your side and the knife in your boot. But it could become a weapon, quickly and easily, when the moment demands it. This is the fundamental truth of Viking life. Every tool can become a weapon. Every farmer, a warrior, every peaceful morning, the prelude to violence. The old gods watch from their hall in Asgard, and they hunger for worthy deeds. Odin Allfather whispers in the wind that carries your longship across unknown seas. Thor's hammer crashes in the thunder that masks the sound of your approach. Freya counts the slain and chooses the worthy dead for Valhalla's golden halls. You are their child, shaped by fire and ice, hardened by necessity, and sharpened by the grinding stone of survival. You are a Viking, and the sea calls your name. Stand with me now, on the edge of decision, where a young man's future hangs balanced like a blade on its point. You are 20 summers old, strong in arm and sound in wind, but you are not the eldest son. That honor belongs to your brother, which means he will inherit the farm, the animals, the silver arm rings that represent your family's wealth. Custom and law have spoken. You must make your own way in the world. This is no tragedy in a land where tragedy is commonplace. This is simply the way of things, as unchanging as the movement of seasons and as inevitable as winter. The law of inheritance serves a brutal purpose in a brutal land. It prevents farms from being divided into plots too small to sustain life. Better that one son prospers while others seek their fortune elsewhere, then that all should starve on inadequate portions. But where will you go? The forest offers hunting, but game grows scarce when too many hunters stalk the same paths. You might hire yourself out to a richer farmer, but that makes you little better than a slave, dependent on another man's goodwill for your daily bread. You might try to carve a new farm from the wilderness, but that is work for many hands and deep pockets, neither of which you possess. No, there is another way, whispered in the firelit halls when ale loosens tongues, and glory seems as real as the flames that warm your face. The way west, across the Whale Road, to lands where monasteries stand undefended, and trading towns grow fat on silver they cannot properly guard. Your grandfather speaks sometimes of the great raid on Lindisfarne, 40 years past, when dragon ships appeared like a nightmare from the sea and struck terror into the hearts of Christian monks. The warriors who returned from that expedition carried silver crosses and golden chalices, silk cloth, and bags of silver coins. They purchased land with their plunder, built halls to rival those of Jarls, attracted followers of their own. But it is not merely wealth that calls to you, though wealth would be welcome. It is the chance to make your mark upon the world, to earn a reputation that will outlive your mortal flesh. In this society, where memory is more precious than gold, where the songs sung in halls preserve the deeds of heroes for generations, a man's reputation is his only true inheritance. The choice, when it comes, seems almost inevitable. Ragnar Ironarm is gathering a crew for his longship, the Rowan's Wind. He needs 30 good men with strong backs and stronger hearts, warriors willing to sail beyond the edge of the known world in search of plunder and glory. The shares will be divided equally among all crew members after Ragnar takes his captain's portion. If the gods smile upon the venture, every man will return wealthy enough to purchase land, cattle, a sword worthy of his deeds. If the gods frown, well then, you will feast in Valhalla. And what warrior could ask for a more glorious end? You volunteer on a morning when the wind blows from the west and carries the scent of distant shores. Ragnar looks you up and down with the calculating gaze of a man who has led warriors into battle and brought most of them home again. He tests the strength of your grip, the speed of your reflexes, the steadiness of your gaze. Finally, he nods. "You'll do," he says. And with those words, your old life ends and your new one begins. Around you, other young men are making the same choice, driven by the same pressures and the same dreams. Some are second or third sons, like yourself. Others are men who have lost their farms to debt or disaster. A few are outlaws, expelled from their communities for crimes both great and small. All are united by necessity and ambition, by the shared understanding that their best hope for prosperity lies not in the cold soil of home, but in the uncertain promise of distant shores. This is the hunger that drove the Viking expansion, not savage bloodlust, but the simple economics of survival in a land that could not support all its children. The raids that would terrorize Europe for the next 2 centuries began here, in the calculations of desperate men faced with hard choices and harder alternatives. The sea beckons, dark and dangerous and full of promise. You have made your choice. Now, you must live with its consequences. The sacred grove stands apart from the settlement, a circle of ancient trees whose branches seem to whisper secrets older than memory. You approach with offerings, a handful of barley, a cup of ale, a small silver pendant that represents a month's careful saving. The gods are hungry, and mortals who would seek their favor must feed them well. This is no cathedral of stone and glass, no temple built to impress with architectural grandeur. The Norse gods dwell in simpler places, in the curve of tree roots and the play of light through leaves, in the crash of surf against rocky shores and the howl of wind across empty moors. They are closer to the earth than the Christian God, more immediate in their presence and their demands. You hang your offerings on the branches of the sacred oak and speak the words your father taught you, words passed down through generations of warriors and farmers who understood that survival depends as much on divine favor as on human effort. The rituals are older than Christianity, older than the Roman Empire, rooted in the bedrock of northern belief. Odin Allfather watches from his high seat in Asgard, his ravens Hugin and Munin carrying word of mortal deeds to his ears. He is the god of wisdom and war, of poetry and death, and his favor is essential for any warrior who would succeed in battle. But Odin is not a gentle god. He demands sacrifice, sometimes of gold and silver, sometimes of blood, sometimes of life itself. The berserkers who fight in howling fury are his chosen ones, granted the strength of bears and wolves in exchange for their sanity and their souls. Thor Thunder God is more straightforward in his demands and his gifts. He protects farmers and common folk with his hammer Mjolnir, which never misses its target and always returns to his hand. His strength is legendary, but so is his temper, and wise men do not invoke him lightly. Still, he is perhaps the most beloved of the gods, for he stands between Midgard and the giants who would destroy the world of men. Freya of the Golden Tears chooses half the battle slain for her hall Sesrumni, while Odin claims the other half for Valhalla. She is goddess of love and fertility, but also of war and death, and her blessing is sought by warriors and farmers alike. Her tears, shed for her missing husband, become gold when they fall to earth. A fitting metaphor for the way sorrow and loss can sometimes transform into unexpected wealth. The gods are not distant, perfect beings like the Christian Trinity. They quarrel among themselves, make mistakes, suffer defeats. They will die at Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, when the world burns and is reborn. This knowledge makes them more human, more approachable, more worthy of both respect and affection. But there are darker gods, as well, and darker practices. Loki the trickster, father of lies and monsters, whose cunning sometimes serves the gods, but will ultimately destroy them. The ritual sacrifice called blot, where animals, and sometimes humans, are killed to ensure divine favor. The practice of satyr magic, associated with women, and viewed with suspicion by many men, though Odin himself learned its secrets. As you prepare for your first raid, these beliefs shape your understanding of what lies ahead. Death in battle is not to be feared if it comes with honor intact. The Valkyries will carry worthy warriors to Odin's hall, where they will feast and fight until Ragnarök comes. This is not mere superstition. It is a practical philosophy that allows men to face terrible odds with steady hearts and unwavering courage. You touch the hammer pendant at your throat. Feel the reassuring weight of iron blessed by the priest chieftain who serves your community as both spiritual guide and temporal leader. The gods are with you, Their strength flows in your veins. Their wisdom guides your hand. Their favor will shield you from harm, or it will not, and you will die as men have always died. And the ravens will feast on your flesh while your spirit travels the dark road to hell's kingdom. But even that is acceptable if death comes with honor. In a world where winter kills as surely as any sword, where starvation and disease wait behind every mild season, a glorious death is preferable to a meaningless one. The smoke from the sacred fire carries your prayers upward toward the branches where Yggdrasil, the world tree, reaches toward the stars. The gods are listening. Soon they will answer. The training ground lies beyond the settlement, where the earth has been beaten hard by countless feet and watered with the blood of warriors learning their deadly craft. You arrive before dawn, as is proper for men who would serve aboard a longship, and find Ragnar Iron Arm already there, testing the edge of his seax with his thumb. A blade, he says without looking up, is only as good as the man who wields it, and a man is only as good as his training allows him to be. Today, we see what manner of warrior the gods have given me. The other members of the crew are gathering, 30 men of varying ages and experience, but all bound by the same purpose and the same desperate hope. Some are veterans of previous raids, scarred and steady, moving with the easy confidence that comes from having faced death and emerged victorious. Others are young like yourself, eager and untested, trying to hide their nervousness behind bravado and bluster. Your first lesson is simple. You know nothing. The axe you have carried since boyhood, the weapon you thought you understood, might as well be a foreign thing in your hands. Ragnar shows you how to hold it properly, how to move with it, how to make it an extension of your will rather than merely a tool you happen to be grasping. The shield wall, he explains, positioning the crew in a line with overlapping wooden shields, is the foundation of all Viking warfare. Rome had its legions, but we have something better. Men who know that their lives depend on the warrior beside them, and his life depends on them. You learn to move in unison, shields locked together like the scales of some great dragon. The warrior to your right covers your sword arm side, while you protect his shield arm. If either of you fails, both die. It is a lesson in trust as much as warfare, a recognition that individual heroics must sometimes yield to collective survival. But the shield wall is only one part of your education. You learn to fight with spear and seax, to grapple with bare hands when weapons are lost or broken. You learn to use your environment as a weapon, how to fight on ship decks slippery with blood and spray, how to maintain footing on rocky shores or muddy riverbanks. More importantly, you learn when not to fight. Ragnar is no berserker, lost in battle fury and heedless of consequences. He is a calculating warrior who understands that the goal of raiding is not glorious death, but profitable survival. A dead hero, he says dryly, spends no silver and sires no children, save the glorious deaths for poets and fools. The physical training is brutal but necessary. Your body must be hardened to endure long sea voyages, forced marches, the shock and strain of combat. You run until your lungs burn and your legs tremble, then run further still. You practice sword work until your arms ache and your hands bleed from gripping leather-wrapped hilts. You learn to fight while exhausted, while wounded, while half drowned from being thrown overboard during shipboard combat exercises. But perhaps more important than physical prowess is the cultivation of reputation. In Viking society, your worth is measured not by the wealth you accumulate, but by the manner in which you acquire it. Cowardice is worse than death, for it destroys not only your own honor, but that of your family and descendants. Courage in the face of impossible odds, loyalty to your oath brothers, generosity with plunder. These are the virtues that transform mere warriors into heroes worthy of song. Ragnar teaches by example as much as by instruction. You watch how he settles disputes among the crew with firm but fair judgment. How he shares his own meal with a younger warrior who has been too proud to admit his hunger. How he speaks to each man according to his nature. Harsh words for the lazy, encouragement for the struggling, respect for the proven. An oath, he tells you one evening, as the crew shares ale around the dying fire, is the most sacred thing a warrior possesses. More valuable than silver, more precious than life itself. When you swear to follow me into battle, you bind your fate to mine and mine to yours. I will not lead you into hopeless fights or ask you to die for my glory alone. In return, you will not falter when the fighting grows fierce or the odds turn against us. One by one, the crew members rise and speak their oaths. The words vary, but the meaning is constant. Loyalty unto death, shared fortune good and ill, brotherhood forged in iron and sealed in blood. When your turn comes, you find that the words flow easily from your lips, as if you had always known them. I swear by Thor's hammer and Odin's spear, you say, surprised by the steadiness of your own voice, to follow Ragnar Iron Arm wherever the sea may carry us. His enemies are my enemies, his victories my victories, his fate my fate. May the gods witness this oath and hold me to it. The ceremony concludes with the sharing of a cup, each man drinking from the same vessel to symbolize the bonds that now unite you. You taste ale and something else, the metallic tang of blood, for each man has pricked his palm with his knife and let a few drops fall into the communal cup. You are no longer merely a farmer's son seeking his fortune. You are a Viking warrior, bound by sacred oaths to your captain and your crewmates. Your reputation is their reputation, your honor their honor. When the longship sails west toward unknown shores, you will sail as one of 30 men who have sworn to live and die together. The gods are watching. The ravens circle overhead. Soon, very soon, it will be time to test your oaths in the crucible of battle. In the great hall that serves as temporary home for Ragnar's crew, you learn what it truly means to be part of a war band. This is not merely a collection of individuals, united by common purpose. It is something deeper, older, more fundamental than that. It is a brotherhood forged in the image of Odin's chosen warriors, the Einherjar, who feast and fight in Valhalla while waiting for the final battle at the end of the world. The evening meal becomes a ritual of bonding as significant as any religious ceremony. You sit shoulder to shoulder with men who were strangers a month ago, but who now know your strengths and weaknesses better than your own blood relatives. Eric One Eye, the grizzled veteran who lost his left eye in a raid on the Frankish coast, teaches you the proper way to sharpen a blade. Bjorn the Younger, barely 18, but already marked by scars from 3 successful voyages, shares the secret of keeping your bowstring dry in the dampest weather. The sharing of stories is perhaps most important of all. Around the long tables, where ale flows freely and the fire casts dancing shadows on smoke-blackened walls, warriors speak of their deeds and their dreams, their fears and their aspirations. You learn that Gunnar Eriksson sails to earn enough silver to purchase the freedom of his sister, captured by Slavic raiders the previous summer. That Thorvald the Red seeks vengeance against the monks who killed his father during a peace negotiation gone wrong. That Olaf Shipbreaker, despite his fierce reputation, sends half his share of every raid's plunder to support the widow and children of his fallen oath brother. These men become more than allies. They become family, bound together by shared hardship and mutual dependence. When Bjorn falls ill with fever, the entire crew tends to him in shifts, bringing him water and broth, telling stories to keep his spirits up during the long nights when the sickness burns through his veins. When Eric's weapons are damaged during a training accident, others contribute from their own gear to ensure he will not sail unequipped. The bonds between crew members extend beyond mere practical cooperation. You develop the supernatural awareness that comes to men who have faced death together. The ability to anticipate your shield brother's movements in combat, to sense his needs before he speaks them, to communicate through glances and gestures when words would be too dangerous or too slow. Ragnar fosters this unity through both design and instinct. He assigns sleeping spaces not by rank or age, but by temperament, pairing hot-headed young warriors with steadier veterans, placing natural leaders next to men who follow willingly. During training exercises, he rotates partnerships constantly, ensuring that every crew member learns to work with every other. But perhaps most importantly, he shares everything: knowledge, responsibility, and risk. Unlike the Jarls and Kings who lead armies from the rear while common warriors die at the front, Ragnar fights beside his men, faces the same dangers, bleeds the same blood. His reputation for fairness is legendary throughout the coastal settlements, and warriors compete for the privilege of serving under his command. You learn the subtle hierarchy that governs the crew without contradicting its fundamental egalitarianism. Ragnar is captain, his word law aboard ship and during raids. Eric One Eye serves as his second in command, a position earned through decades of faithful service and wise counsel. The other veterans form an informal council whose advice Ragnar seeks on matters of strategy and tactics. But when battle comes, all distinctions vanish save those between the living and the dead. The youngest warrior and the most experienced fighter face the same arrows, swing the same weapons, depend equally on courage and skill and the favor of the gods. In combat, a man's worth is measured not by his social position, but by his willingness to stand firm when others falter, to strike hard when the moment demands it, to die well if death cannot be avoided. The crew develops its own traditions, its own rituals, its own private jokes and shared memories. You learn the story behind every scar, every nickname, every superstition. Why Thorstein always touches his Thor's hammer before boarding ship. Why Hakon refuses to eat fish on the night before a raid. Why Ulf keeps a small wooden carving of his daughter in his weapon pouch. And why no one mentions that she died of plague the winter before last. These details matter because they make the abstract concept of brotherhood concrete and immediate. When you stand in the shield wall with your oath brothers beside you, You're not fighting for glory or plunder or the favor of distant gods. You're fighting for Eric, who taught you to read the signs of weather in the morning sky. For Bjorn, who shared his rations during the lean days when supplies ran low. For Ragnar himself, whose steady leadership has kept you all alive through training that has killed lesser men. The war band becomes a world unto itself, complete and self-contained, requiring nothing from the outside save opportunities to prove its worth. You begin to understand why some warriors never truly returned from their voyages, why they spend their winters in foreign lands rather than in the halls of their birth. The brotherhood of the longship offers something that settled life cannot. Absolute loyalty, complete trust, the certain knowledge that the men beside you would die before they would betray you. As the day of departure approaches, you feel the weight of these bonds settling around you like invisible armor. You are no longer alone in the world, no longer dependent solely on your own strength and cunning. You are part of something larger and stronger than yourself. A brotherhood of wolves, ready to hunt together across the whale roads of the world. The shipyard echoes with the sound of hammers and adzes, the rasp of planes shaping green wood into the curves that will carry you across unknown seas. Here, in this maze of timber and rope and iron, the greatest achievement of Viking civilization takes shape beneath the hands of master craftsmen whose skills have been refined across generations. You stand beside the raven's wind and marvel at the elegant simplicity of her construction. She's perhaps 75 feet from stem to stern, narrow as a knife blade and flexible as a living thing. Her shallow draft will allow her to navigate rivers where larger vessels would run aground, while her seaworthy design can handle the worst storms the North Sea can summon. Kjetil the shipwright, whose hands have shaped more than 40 vessels over his long career, explains the subtleties of construction that make such versatility possible. The overlapping planks of the hull are joined with iron rivets, but the joints are deliberately left slightly loose to allow the ship to flex with the waves rather than fighting them. A rigid vessel would shatter in heavy seas. This living thing of wood and iron bends and yields and endures. "See here," he says, running his weathered fingers along the gently curving stem post, "how the lines flow like water itself. A ship must move through the sea as easily as the sea moves around the ship. Force creates resistance, and resistance creates drag, and drag means slow voyages and empty bellies. The mast is a single pine trunk, carefully selected and seasoned, rising nearly 30 feet above the deck. The sail, when rigged, is a work of art in itself, woven wool and linen in alternating stripes, waterproofed with fish oil and decorated with the runes that invoke divine protection for vessel and crew. In a good wind, the raven's wind can make better than 10 knots, fast enough to outrun pursuit or close with prey before defenders can organize resistance. But speed under sail is only part of the ship's capabilities. When the wind fails or tactical situation demands it, the crew can run out 16 pairs of oars and drive her forward by muscle power alone. The oar ports are positioned precisely, allowing maximum leverage while maintaining the vessel's structural integrity. Each oarsman sits on a simple bench, his weapons and personal gear stowed within easy reach. You learn to handle your oar with the same dedication you have devoted to sword and shield. The rhythm must be perfect. 32 men pulling in unison. The blade entering the water cleanly, pushing through the stroke with maximum power, lifting clear without disturbing the set of the man behind you. Hour after hour you practice, until the motions become as natural as breathing, until you can maintain the stroke even when exhaustion makes your vision blur and your hands cramp around the ash handle. The ship's cargo capacity is limited but sufficient for the crew's needs. The hold amidships can carry supplies for several weeks at sea: barrels of fresh water, bags of dried meat and hardtack, extra weapons and tools, trade goods for markets where Vikings come as merchants rather than raiders. Space is at such a premium that every item must justify its weight and bulk. But the Raven's Wind is designed for war as much as commerce. Fighting platforms fore and aft provide elevated positions for archers and spear throwers. The sides are built high enough to provide some protection from missile fire, while remaining low enough to allow warriors to leap over the side for beach assaults. Iron-reinforced ram at the bow can hold smaller vessels or drive them onto rocky shores. Most impressive of all is the ship's ability to operate in waters where other vessels fear to venture. The flexible hull and shallow draft allow navigation in rivers barely deep enough to float a farm cart. You can sail far inland, striking targets hundreds of miles from the sea, then retreat to the safety of deep water before effective pursuit can be organized. The psychological impact of Viking longships cannot be underestimated. To the inhabitants of coastal settlements, these vessels appear like supernatural predators, emerging from morning mist or pre-dawn darkness. The dragon-head prow, carved with fierce eyes and gaping jaws, seems to fix its gaze on cowering victims. The sight of that distinctive silhouette on the horizon has been known to cause entire communities to flee inland, abandoning their homes and possessions rather than face the warriors it carries. Ketil shows you the secret compartment built into the stern post where the ship's most valuable cargo will be stored. Not gold or silver, but the charts and sailing directions that represent generations of accumulated knowledge. These rough maps, carved on wooden tablets or scratched on pieces of leather, mark the location of favorable winds and dangerous reefs, safe harbors, and profitable targets. They are worth more than any treasure, for they make possible the voyages that bring treasure home. As the final preparations are completed, you begin to understand that the Raven's Wind is more than mere transportation. She is a living extension of her crew, a tool perfectly adapted to the purpose for which she was created. In her graceful lines and purposeful construction, you see reflected the same qualities that mark the Vikings themselves: practical elegance, deadly efficiency, and the ability to thrive in environments that would destroy less adaptable beings. Soon, she will carry you beyond the edge of the known world, into waters where monsters swim in the depths and foreign shores beckon with the promise of plunder and glory. But first, you must learn to read the signs that will guide your passage across the trackless ocean. The art of navigation in an age before compass or chart is a mystery as deep as any magic, requiring skills that must be learned through years of patient observation and passed down from master to student like sacred knowledge. Einar Wavewalker, the Raven's Wind's navigator, begins your education on a clear morning when the wind blows steady from the northwest and the sea stretches unbroken to the horizon. Forget everything you think you know about finding your way, he says, his weathered face creased with concentration as he studies the sky. The landlubber looks for paths and landmarks, fixed points that remain constant from season to season. The seafarer must read signs written in water and wind, in the flight of birds and the color of clouds. Your first lesson is the sunboard, a wooden disc marked with concentric circles and radial lines that allows a skilled navigator to determine both direction and latitude by measuring the height of the sun at different times of day. The calculations are complex, requiring knowledge of seasons and star positions accumulated over generations of seafaring. But the basic principle is elegant. The sun's path across the sky changes predictably with latitude, and those changes can be used to plot position with remarkable accuracy. But what happens when clouds obscure the sun for days at a time, as frequently occurs in northern waters? Einar shows you the sunstone, a piece of crystalline mineral that can detect the polarization of sunlight even through overcast skies. By rotating the stone and observing the patterns of light and shadow it creates, an experienced navigator can determine the sun's position even when it remains invisible to the naked eye. The sea speaks to those who know how to listen. Einar explains as the raven's wind cuts through moderate swells under a gray sky. Every wave tells a story about the wind that created it, the depth of water beneath us, the proximity of land or ice. Learn to read these stories, and the ocean becomes a book written in a language older than runes. You study the subtle differences between wave patterns, how swells generated by distant storms differ from wind waves raised by local weather, how the interaction between swells and tidal currents creates characteristic patterns that mark the approach of land masses. Even the color of the water carries information. The deep blue of oceanic depths, the green tint that indicates shallow coastal waters, the brown stain that reveals river mouths and harbors. The behavior of seabirds provides another crucial source of navigational data. Gannets and puffins rarely venture more than a day's flight from land, so their presence suggests proximity to nesting sites and fishing grounds. The direction of their flight at dawn and dusk indicates the bearing to the nearest coastline. Even the species of birds encountered can reveal information about latitude and the nature of nearby shores. Weather patterns become a constant source of fascination and concern. You learn to read the subtle signs that predict storms, hours, or even days before they arrive. The particular quality of light that precedes violent squalls, the behavior of seabirds before heavy weather, the way swells change pattern when distant gales generate energy that travels hundreds of miles across open ocean. Cloud formations provide their own navigation aids. Mountains and large islands create distinctive cloud patterns, visible from far beyond the range at which the land itself can be seen. Ice blink, the white reflection of pack ice on the underside of distant clouds, warns of hazards that could crush a wooden ship like an eggshell. The greenish tint of clouds over shallow water can reveal the location of banks and shoals where rich fishing grounds might be found. But perhaps most important of all is learning to navigate by the stars. When clear skies permit, the night sky becomes a vast chart written in points of light that have guided sailors since the first humans ventured beyond sight of land. The North Star holds steady while other constellations wheel around it, providing a constant reference for direction. The height of Polaris, above the horizon, reveals latitude with the same precision as the sunboard, while the position of other stars indicates the time of night and the season of the year. Einar teaches you the names of the most important stars and constellations, not in the Latin of Christian scholars, but in the older tongue of your ancestors. The Great Bear, which the southern peoples call Ursa Major, is to you the wagon or the elk. The bright star Vega, which will serve as the pole star in future millennia, is the falling eagle. These names carry stories and mnemonics that help fix the patterns in memory. For a navigator who cannot remember the stars is as useless as a warrior who cannot remember which end of his sword cuts. Navigation, Einar tells you, as you practice taking star sights with a simple wooden instrument, is part science and part art, part calculation and part intuition. The tools and techniques I teach you will serve you well in clear weather and familiar waters, but when storms rage and landmarks disappear, when you sail beyond the edge of all charts into waters no man has seen before, you must learn to trust something deeper than instruments and calculations. That something deeper is the sea sense that comes to men who have spent their lives on the water. An almost supernatural awareness of wind and current, weather and tide. The subtle signs that mark the difference between safe passage and disaster. It cannot be taught in the ordinary sense, only developed through years of experience and countless hours of patient observation. The responsibility weighs heavily on Einar's shoulders, for upon his skills depend the lives of 30 warriors and the success of their expedition. A miscalculation of even a few degrees can mean the difference between reaching a rich monastery and sailing into empty ocean until water and provisions run out. Too far north, and the ship might be trapped in pack ice. Too far south, and favorable winds might be lost, extending the voyage beyond the crew's ability to sustain it. Yet despite the enormous challenges involved, Viking navigators achieve feats of seamanship that seem almost impossible even by modern standards. They discovered and settled Iceland, Greenland, and the coast of North America centuries before Columbus was born. They established trade routes from the Arctic Circle to the Mediterranean, from the Atlantic Ocean to the rivers of Russia. Their knowledge of winds and currents, of seasonal weather patterns and the behavior of marine life allowed them to sail confidently across trackless oceans when other peoples rarely ventured beyond sight of land. As the Raven's wind continues her voyage toward the setting sun, you begin to appreciate the magnitude of the achievement these skills represent. Every successful raid, every profitable trading voyage, every settlement established in distant lands depends upon the ability to find your way across waters that show no roads, no signposts, no landmarks save those written in wind and wave and the wheeling patterns of the stars. The sea is vast and dangerous and utterly unforgiving of error. But to those who learn to read its language, it becomes a highway to adventure and wealth beyond anything the narrow confines of Scandinavia could provide. You are learning that language now, word by word and lesson by lesson, preparing for the day when you too might captain a longship across the whale roads of the world. 3 days out from the last familiar headland, The raven's wind cuts through swells that have traveled 1,000 miles from the Western Ocean's heart. The rhythm of the voyage has settled into your bones. The creak of rigging, the hiss of water along the hull, the steady stroke of oars when the wind fails or blows contrary to your course. But now, something changes in the quality of the air. A subtle shift that makes Einar Wave Walker lift his head like a hound catching scent. Land, he announces, though the horizon stretches unbroken in every direction. 2 days sailing, perhaps less if the wind holds. You strain your eyes but see nothing save the endless procession of waves and the occasional flash of seabirds wheeling overhead. Yet gradually you begin to notice the signs that speak to the experienced navigator. The slight change in wave patterns as swells encounter the continental shelf. The different quality of light reflected from clouds that pass over land rather than empty ocean. The increasing frequency of birds that nest on cliffs and fish in coastal waters. The crew's mood shifts with the changing air. The easy camaraderie of the open ocean gives way to a more focused tension as men begin the mental preparation for battle. Weapons are checked and rechecked, edges tested and resharpened. Lucky charms are touched and prayers whispered to the gods who grant victory and preserve life. The transformation from seafarers to warriors begins long before any enemy comes into sight. Ragnar gathers the crew around him as the sun reaches its zenith on what may be the last peaceful day of the voyage. His words are carefully chosen, for he knows that courage is a fragile thing that must be nurtured and sustained rather than simply commanded. Tomorrow or the day after, we will test ourselves against unknown enemies in an unknown land, he says, his voice carrying clearly over the sound of wind and wave. Some of you have done this before. Others face their first battle. To the veterans, I say, remember that your experience is a gift to be shared with your younger brothers. To the new men, I say, trust in your training, trust in your weapons, trust in the warriors beside you. He pauses, his gaze traveling from face to face, meeting each man's eyes in turn. We go not as berserkers driven by blind fury, but as warriors guided by wisdom and bound by oaths. We take what we need and can carry, but we do not kill for pleasure or destroy for sport. The reputation we build on this voyage will determine whether doors open or close for future expeditions. That night, sleep comes fitfully to most of the crew. You lie wrapped in your cloak on the hard deck planking, listening to the muttered prayers and restless stirring of 30 men facing the unknown. Some warriors boast of their eagerness for battle, but you notice that even the most experienced raiders seem subdued as the moment of truth approaches. Dawn brings the first glimpse of the foreign shore. A low line of green hills rising from what appears to be a well-protected harbor. Smoke from cooking fires marks the location of settlements, while the glint of morning sunlight on whitewashed walls suggests buildings of stone rather than the wooden halls of your homeland. This is a richer land than the one you left behind. A place where wealth accumulates and defenses grow soft from long years of peace. Einar consults his charts and instruments, comparing the coastline visible ahead with the descriptions passed down by previous raiders. That should be the monastery of St. Cuthbert, he announces after careful consideration. The brothers are said to be rich in silver and gold, with a library containing books worth a king's ransom. More importantly, They are protected only by their faith, and a handful of elderly warriors past their prime. The final approach requires careful planning. Viking raids succeed through speed and surprise, rather than overwhelming force, and the loss of either advantage can transform a profitable expedition into a costly disaster. Ragnar studies the shoreline through eyes that have learned to read defensive possibilities in every cliff and beach, every river mouth and harbor entrance. We will land at dawn tomorrow, he decides. One boat to scout the landing site and eliminate any guards, then the main force to strike before the alarm can be spread. Speed above all. We want to be back at sea before any significant opposition can be organized. The scent of foreign shores grows stronger as the raven's wind ghosts through calm seas toward her destination. It carries the smell of different trees, different crops, different animals than those of your homeland. But underneath the exotic fragrances lies something else. The clean salt smell of treasure waiting to be taken, of reputations waiting to be made, of destiny rushing toward you with the inevitability of the tide. You touch the iron blade at your side and whisper a prayer to Thor Thunderer, asking for strength in battle and wisdom in victory. Around you, 30 other warriors make their own preparations for what lies ahead. Tomorrow, we'll see the testing of oaths sworn in smoky halls, the proving of courage claimed around ale cups, the transformation of farmers' sons into sea wolves worthy of saga. The foreign shore beckons in the morning light, and the ravens circle overhead, hungry for the feast to come. The raven's wind lies at anchor in a sheltered cove 2 miles from your target, hidden from casual observation by a rocky headland that juts into the sea like a giant's fist. The monastery of St. Cuthbert occupies a commanding position on the cliffs above, its stone walls and tower clearly visible in the early morning light. From this distance it appears peaceful, almost serene, with no sign that its inhabitants suspect the death that approaches with the dawn. Ragnar has chosen his landing site with the eye of a man who understands both warfare and the treacherous nature of foreign shores. The beach is broad enough to accommodate the ship's landing, yet protected from observation by the monastic community above. A narrow path winds up the cliff face, defensible if held by determined warriors, but likely to be unguarded at this early hour when most men still lie abed. The final preparations begin before the sun shows its face above the eastern horizon. Each warrior checks his gear one last time. Shield boss tight on its handle, spear point sharp and properly seated, sword loose in its scabbard for quick drawing. Some men daub their faces with charcoal and ochre in patterns that invoke divine protection, or simply make them appear more terrifying to their enemies. You apply your own war paint with hands that remain surprisingly steady, drawing the hammer of Thor across your forehead and the ravens of Odin around your eyes. The ritual is partly practical. The dark pigments reduce glare and make facial features harder to distinguish in combat, but mostly psychological. A way of putting aside your peaceful identity and embracing the warrior self that must emerge for the next few hours. Ragnar moves among his men like a general inspecting troops before battle, offering quiet words of encouragement to the nervous, final instructions to the inexperienced, simple acknowledgement to the veterans who need nothing more than confirmation that their captain trusts their skill. His calm confidence spreads through the crew like oil on water, steadying nerves and focusing minds on the task ahead. Remember, he says as the eastern sky begins to lighten, we are not bandits or berserkers. We are warriors of the northern seas, and our reputation depends as much on how we conduct ourselves as on what we accomplish. Kill when you must, spare when you can, and always remember that today's enemies may become tomorrow's trading partners. The landing party consists of 6 men, yourself among them, whose task is to secure the beach and the path to the monastery while eliminating any guards or early rising monks who might raise an alarm. It is a role that requires stealth rather than strength, cunning rather than courage. Though both qualities may be needed before the morning ends, you slip over the side into water so cold it takes your breath away, then wade silently through the surf toward the dark beach ahead. Your weapons are wrapped in oiled leather to protect them from the salt spray. Your movements as quiet as you can manage while struggling through sand that seems determined to suck the boots from your feet. The beach, when you reach it, is empty save for the usual debris of storm and tide, driftwood and seaweed, the bones of fish and seabirds, fragments of pottery that speak of ships wrecked on these shores in seasons past. No guards patrol the waterline, no lookouts scan the sea from elevated positions. The monks clearly believe their isolation and their god provide sufficient protection from earthly threats. The path up the cliff face proves more challenging than it appeared from the ship. What looked like a simple track is revealed as a steep and treacherous climb, worn smooth by centuries of sandaled feet, but treacherous with loose stones and patches of slippery moss. You climb in single file, each man responsible for the safety of the warrior behind him, moving with the careful precision of hunters stalking prey that might bolt at the first careless sound. Halfway up the cliff, the lead scout raises his hand in warning. Voices drift down from above, 2 men speaking in the liquid syllables of the local tongue, their words unintelligible, but their tone casual and unhurried. Guards making their morning rounds, perhaps, or simply monks rising early for their dawn prayers. Either way, they represent a threat to the mission's success. The capture is accomplished with brutal efficiency. The 2 monks, for that is what they prove to be, elderly men whose greatest sin is an early rising, are silenced before they can cry out, bound and gagged with strips torn from their own robes. They will live if they remain still and quiet, but their eyes hold the knowledge that their world is about to change forever. From the cliff top, the monastery spreads before you like a map drawn by an enemy's hand. The buildings are arranged around a central courtyard, with the church dominating the complex and the monks' dormitories, scriptorium, and treasury occupying the surrounding structures. Smoke rises from the kitchen chimney, suggesting that some of the brotherhood are already about their morning duties. But most importantly, the gates stand open, unguarded, with no sign that the inhabitants suspect any danger. The main force can land unopposed and reach the monastery before effective resistance can be organized. Your task is complete. Now comes the real test. You signal toward the sea with a polished bronze mirror, flashing the agreed pattern of reflections that tells Ragnar the way is clear. Within minutes, the Raven's Wind appears around the headland, her crew rowing with smooth precision toward the waiting beach. The sight of 30 warriors moving in unison, their weapons gleaming in the early light, their dragon-proud ship cutting through the waves like some supernatural predator, is magnificent and terrible. The thunder before the storm has passed. Now comes the lightning and the wind and the rain of steel that will transform this peaceful morning into a day of blood and plunder that men will remember for generations to come. The charge up the cliff path transforms 30 individual warriors into a single organism of violence and purpose. No war cries echo from the rocks. Surprise is worth more than intimidation, but you can feel the collective will of the war band focused like a spear point on the monastery walls ahead. Your heart pounds with exertion and anticipation as weathered boots find purchase on stones slick with morning dew. The first resistance comes not from armed guards, but from a young monk who emerges from the kitchen carrying a basket of freshly baked bread. His face cycles through confusion, recognition, and terror in the space of a heartbeat before Thorvald the Red strikes him down with the flat of his axe. The boy, for he cannot be more than 16, crumples unconscious to the flagstones, bray scattering around his still form like an offering to hungry gods. Now stealth becomes impossible. A woman's scream pierces the morning air from somewhere within the complex, followed by the urgent clanging of the warning bell as someone reaches the church tower. But the alarm comes too late. The Vikings are already inside the walls, spreading through the courtyard like wolves among sheep. You follow Ragnar and 6 others toward the treasury, a stone building whose heavy oak door and iron-barred windows speak of secrets worth protecting. Behind you, the sounds of conquest echo from every corner of the monastery. Doors splintering under axe blows, voices raised in prayer and pleading. The clash of weapons as a few of the younger monks attempt futile resistance. The treasury door resists your initial assault, its age-darkened oak bound with iron and secured with a lock that would challenge even a skilled burglar. But Vikings did not become the terror of 3 continents through patience with stubborn barriers. Beyond the younger produces a heavy warhammer, and within moments the ancient wood yields with a crash that echoes through the stone corridors. What lies beyond takes your breath away. Not from beauty, though beauty is certainly present, but from the sheer concentration of wealth that greets your dazzled eyes. Silver chalices and golden crosses, illuminated manuscripts whose pages glow with precious inks, silk altar cloths heavy with embroidered thread, bags of silver coins that represent the accumulated donations of decades of faithful worshippers. By Thor's hammer, Gunnar Eriksson whispers, his voice thick with awe, "There's enough here to purchase a kingdom." But there is no time for wonder. Already, you can hear horn calls from the direction of the harbor. Whether from other Viking ships drawn by the bell's warning or local defenders organizing resistance, you cannot tell. Speed remains essential if the raid is to succeed without costly casualties. You work with practiced efficiency, selecting items that combine maximum value with minimum weight and bulk. The largest treasures, carved altarpieces, and massive silver candlesticks must be left behind. But there are smaller pieces whose worth exceeds their weight in gold. A single illuminated gospel might represent months of work by master scribes and artists, its pages worth more than a farm's annual harvest. The human cargo proves more difficult to manage. The monks offer little resistance. Their vows forbid violence, and most are elderly men whose fighting days, if they ever had any, lie far in the past But the terror in their eyes as they are herded together, like cattle, speaks to the psychological impact of the raid beyond any material loss. Some of the younger monks might bring good prices in the slave markets of Dublin or York, particularly those with obvious literacy and useful skills. The elderly and infirm will be left behind. They would die on the voyage home, and dead slaves benefit no one. It is a cold calculation, but Viking economics allow no room for sentiment. Brother Augustine, the monastery's prior, attempts to negotiate for his community's lives and possessions. He speaks tolerable Norse, learned from peaceful trade contacts, and his words carry the dignity of a man accustomed to authority and respect. Take what silver you will, he pleads, but spare the books. They contain knowledge that belongs to all mankind, not just to our order. Ragnar listens with the courtesy due to a brave man facing inevitable defeat. Your books will be well cared for, he promises, and you sense that he means it. There are men in Ireland and Iceland who value learning above gold. Your knowledge will survive, even if it travels far from where it was created. The loading of the ship proceeds with military precision. The most valuable items are secured in the stern compartment, wrapped in oiled leather to protect them from spray and weather. The human captives are distributed throughout the vessel to prevent any coordinated resistance attempt. Weapons and personal gear are checked one final time before departure. But even as you prepare to withdraw, the price of victory becomes apparent. Olaf Shipbreaker sports a deep gash across his sword arm, taken from a young monk who chose martyrdom over submission. Two others bear lesser wounds, while Eric One-Eye nurses bruised ribs from a fall on the treacherous stone stairs. No one has died, but blood has been shed on both sides. The withdrawal to the ship requires the same discipline as the assault. Rearguard actions keep pursuing defenders at a distance while the main body reaches the beach. But you can see armed riders approaching along the coast road. Local lords are rallying their forces, and the window for safe departure is closing rapidly. The Raven's Wind slips her anchor and turns towards open water as the first arrows begin to fall among the rocks where you landed. Behind you, smoke rises from several monastery buildings, not from deliberate arson, but from cooking fires left unattended in the confusion. The damage could have been far worse. Ragnar's discipline has saved the community from the total destruction that marks less professional raids. As the monastery dwindles to a collection of white dots on the receding shore, you inventory the morning's work, plunder worth several years' income for an entire village, captives who will bring their own prices in foreign markets, and, perhaps, most importantly, the enhancement of reputation that comes from a successful raid conducted with minimal losses. The ravens that gave the ship her name circle overhead, calling harshly as they survey the aftermath of violence. They will feast well today on the carrion left behind, but their cries seem almost approving as they follow the longship toward the horizon. The gods of war are satisfied with the morning's offering. The division of plunder aboard a Viking longship follows rituals as ancient and precise as any religious ceremony. As the Raven's Wind puts distance between herself and the smoking monastery, Ragnar calls for the accounting that will determine each man's share of the morning's work. This is no casual distribution of spoils. Every piece of silver, every valuable captive, every item of worth must be evaluated and allocated according to laws older than memory. The treasure spreads across the deck in glittering profusion. Silver chalices and golden crucifixes, illuminated manuscripts whose vellum pages catch the morning light, silk vestments heavy with embroidered thread, bags of coins that represent the accumulated offerings of generations of faithful worshippers. Mixed among the obvious valuables are items whose worth is less immediately apparent. Bronze bells whose metal can be reforged into weapons, carved ivory pieces that will find ready buyers in Constantinople, even wooden boxes whose simple construction conceals the precious spices and dyes they contain. Ragnar takes his captain's share first, not through greed, but through right established by his leadership and the risks he assumed in planning and executing the raid. His portion amounts to roughly a third of the total value, including first choice among the captives and the finest pieces of worked silver. This is not resented by the crew, for they understand that command carries burdens as well as privileges. The remainder is divided into 30 equal shares, one for each warrior who participated in the assault. The process requires careful evaluation of items whose worth cannot always be measured in simple weight of precious metal. How do you compare a silver chalice with a manuscript illuminated in gold leaf? What is the relative value of a silk altar cloth versus a bag of silver coins? Experience and tradition provide the answers. Eric One Eye, whose decades of raiding have given him encyclopedic knowledge of foreign markets, evaluates each item with the eye of a professional merchant. A gospel book in perfect condition might be worth as much as 50 silver pieces to the right buyer. Perhaps some Irish monastery seeking to replace volumes lost to earlier raids. A carved ivory crucifix could bring 20 pieces in York, where wealthy merchants compete to display their piety. Even the bronze bells have value, for metal is always in demand among smiths and weapon makers. The human captives require even more delicate evaluation. Brother Marcus, young and strong, with obvious literacy, represents significant value in any slave market. His knowledge of Latin and his ability to read and write make him worth perhaps 100 silver pieces to the right buyer. Some wealthy merchant or minor lord who needs a secretary and accountant. Brother Thomas, elderly but possessed of valuable medical knowledge, might bring half that amount from someone seeking a skilled healer. But the captives are also the most problematic aspect of the plunder. They must be fed and guarded during the voyage home, reducing the ship's cargo capacity and increasing the risk of revolt or escape. Worse, they are human beings whose terror and despair create an atmosphere of misery that affects even hardened raiders. Some of the crew avoid looking at the prisoners. Others go out of their way to offer small kindnesses that might ease their suffering. Young Bjorn approaches you as you examine your own share of the treasure. A silver armband worth perhaps 10 pieces. A small carved cross that might bring 2 more. And your portion of the coins that will be divided equally among all crew members. His face shows the mixture of elation and unease that marks many warriors after their first successful raid. I thought it would feel different, he confesses quietly, glancing toward the huddled captives. The treasure is fine enough, but those monks, they were just old men trying to serve their god. Is this how it always feels afterward? You remember your own first battle? years ago in a dispute over grazing rights that escalated into bloodshed. The satisfaction of victory had been overshadowed by the memory of your opponent's eyes as he died, not the eyes of a monster or demon, but of a man not much different from yourself. The feeling passes, you tell him, though you are not entirely certain this is true. What matters is that you held the line when your oath brothers needed you. Ragnar completes the final calculations as the monastery disappears behind the morning haze. Each warrior's share amounts to roughly 15 silver pieces, more than a farmer might see in 2 good harvests, enough to purchase livestock or land, or simply to live well for several months without working. For men who began the voyage with little more than their weapons and their courage, this represents wealth beyond their most optimistic dreams. But the true value of the raid cannot be measured in silver alone. Each participant has enhanced his reputation through successful participation in a dangerous enterprise. The saga tellers will sing of this morning's work, adding the names of worthy warriors to the stories that preserve heroic deeds for future generations. More practically, the demonstrated skills and courage of the crew will make them attractive recruits for future expeditions. The psychological cost is harder to calculate. You have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed, participating in violence that has left men dead and a community shattered. The monks who survived will spend years rebuilding what was destroyed in a few hours, while those taken captive face uncertain futures in foreign lands. These consequences will follow you whether you acknowledge them or not. Yet as you watch the raven's wind's wake foam white against the green sea, you find yourself already thinking of future voyages. The success of this raid has demonstrated the profits to be made through well-planned expeditions, while the relative ease of the victory suggests that other targets might prove equally vulnerable. The taste of silver is sweet, but the taste of success is sweeter still. The ravens still circle overhead, their harsh cries carried away by the wind that fills the ship's striped sail. They are carrion birds, feeders on death and destruction. But they are also the messengers of Odin All-Father, who knows the price of wisdom and the value of victory. Their presence seems to bless the morning's work, marking it as worthy of the attention of gods and heroes. The plunder has been divided, the accounts settled, the course set for home. Now comes the longest and perhaps most dangerous part of the voyage. The journey back across hostile seas to the familiar shores of Scandinavia, where wives and children wait to learn whether their men return as heroes or as memories. The homeward voyage begins under fair skies and favorable winds, but the raven's wind carries more than treasure in her hold. She bears the weight of consequences that will follow her crew long after the silver is spent and the stories told. 3 days out from the monastery, the first storm strikes with the sudden fury that marks the northern seas in spring. You find yourself clinging to the rigging as waves tall as houses crash over the bow, each one threatening to overwhelm the longship's shallow freeboard. The captives chained in the bottom of the hull cry out in terror as green water pours through the oarports, while the crew fights desperately to keep their vessel head-on to the breaking seas. This is the price of raiding. Not just the violence of assault, but the remorseless hostility of the ocean itself. Thorvald the Red is swept overboard during the storm's peak, lost in darkness so complete that even his final cry is swallowed by the howling wind. By morning, when the gale finally moderates, his place at the oars stands empty, a reminder that the sea claims its toll, regardless of human courage or divine favor. His share of the plunder will go to his widow, if she still lives, or to his kinsman, if the winter has claimed her too. The death casts a shadow over the crew that no amount of treasure can lift. Thorvald was a steady warrior, neither the best nor the worst among you, but a man whose loyalty and competence had earned universal respect. His loss raises uncomfortable questions about the price of the expedition's success, questions that have no easy answers. Brother Marcus, the young monk whose literacy makes him the most valuable of the captives, falls ill during the fourth day of the voyage. What begins as simple seasickness develops into something more serious. Fever, delirium, the rattling cough that speaks of lungs filling with fluid. Without proper medicine or the knowledge to treat such conditions, you can only watch as his condition deteriorates. "Let me tend to him," Brother Thomas pleads, his chains clanking as he gestures toward his younger companion. "I have some knowledge of healing arts. His death serves no one's purpose." Ragnar considers the request with the practical calculation that marks all his decisions. A dead slave is worthless, but a healer who might attempt escape or sabotage represents its own risks. Finally, he nods consent, though guards remain close as the elderly monk tends to his fellow captive. The healing proves partially successful. Marcus survives his fever, though he remains weak and requires constant care. But the incident highlights the challenges of managing human cargo on a voyage that grows more dangerous with each passing day. The captives must be fed from the ship's limited supplies, guarded against escape attempts, and kept alive despite conditions that tax even experienced seafarers. Navigation becomes increasingly difficult as the voyage progresses into waters where Einar's charts provide only approximate guidance. The landmarks he relies upon, the particular shape of distant headlands, the color of water over known banks, the flight patterns of seabirds become less reliable as the raven's wind enters regions mapped by hearsay rather than personal observation. On the eighth day, a sail appears on the southern horizon. Friend or enemy? The distance makes identification impossible, but Ragnar orders the crew to battle stations nonetheless. Pirates and rival raiders prowl these waters, drawn by the same opportunities that brought you here. A ship heavy with plunder makes an attractive target for those willing to take by force what they lack the courage to earn through raids of their own. The approaching vessel proves to be another Viking longship, though flying colors you do not recognize. Her crew numbers perhaps 40 men, giving them a significant advantage in any fight. Worse, she appears to be gaining on the treasure-laden Raven's Wind, whose deeper draft and heavy cargo reduce her speed through the water. Ragnar faces a commander's nightmare: fight against superior odds and risk losing everything, or attempt to negotiate with men who might prefer violence to diplomacy. His decision reveals the pragmatic wisdom that has kept him alive through 2 decades of raiding. He orders the crew to display their weapons, but makes no overtly hostile moves. The parley takes place between ships separated by 100 yards of choppy sea. The other captain, a grizzled warrior named Hakon Waverider, makes his position clear. He wants a share of the plunder In exchange for safe passage through waters he claims as his territory. The demand is backed by superior force, but Ragnar's counteroffer shows equal understanding of the situation's realities. Half my cargo for safe passage to the Danish coast, he proposes, plus information about the monastery's defenses and the location of other profitable targets. You gain wealth without risking your men in assault, while I retain enough plunder to satisfy my crew and my own honor. The negotiation continues for nearly an hour, with terms adjusted and refined, as both captains seek advantage without pushing their opponent to desperate measures. Finally, agreement is reached. 1/3 of the treasure and 2 of the captives in exchange for escort to safer waters. It is expensive insurance, but cheaper than the alternative of total loss. The transfer of goods takes place with elaborate ceremony designed to emphasize the voluntary nature of the exchange rather than its coercive reality. Both crews remain armed and watchful, but trade goods and captives change hands without violence. Brother Marcus, still weak from his illness, looks back at you with eyes that hold neither gratitude nor reproach, only the weary acceptance of a man whose fate is decided by forces beyond his control. As the two ships part company, you inventory the cost of the homeward voyage. One crew member dead, 1/3 of the treasure surrendered, and the sobering knowledge that success in raiding depends as much on luck as on courage. The silver that remains still represents significant wealth, but the price paid for it grows heavier with each mile traveled toward home. The familiar coastline of Denmark appears on the horizon like a promise of safety and rest. Soon you will beach the raven's wind on shores where your own language is spoken, where the customs are familiar and the gods are honored in the proper manner. The voyage is nearly over, but its consequences are just beginning. The transformation begins gradually, so subtly that even those living through it fail to recognize its significance until the change is irreversible. You stand on the dock at Hedeby, the great trading center where the Baltic Sea meets the rivers that flow toward the heart of Europe, and watch as Viking longships unload cargoes that tell a story of fundamental change in the northern world. 2 years have passed since your first raid with Ragnar Ironarm. 2 years that have brought 6 more expeditions and wealth beyond your boyhood dreams. But the ship being unloaded beside the Raven's Wind carries no plunder taken by force. Instead, her hold contains amber from the Baltic forests, furs from the lands beyond Lake Ladoga, silver from the Muslim lands that border the Caspian Sea. These goods were acquired through trade rather than raid, purchased with honest silver rather than stolen at sword point. The transformation is not uniform or universal. Some crews still sail west to strike at the monasteries and trading towns of Ireland and Britain, bringing back the familiar harvest of gold and slaves and foreign silver. But increasingly, the most successful captains have discovered that merchant voyages often prove more profitable than raids, with far less risk of death or injury to valuable crew members. Ragnar himself has evolved from war leader to merchant prince, though he retains the skills and reputation that made him formidable in battle. His warehouses in Hedeby store goods from a dozen lands: silk from Constantinople, wine from the Frankish kingdoms, spices from lands so distant their names exist only in the tales of Arab traders. The profits from legitimate commerce have made him wealthy enough to own 3 longships and employ crews that number in the hundreds. Trade, he explains as you inventory, the latest cargo from a voyage up the Russian rivers, offers advantages that trading cannot match. A merchant who deals fairly gains the trust of his trading partners, which leads to better prices and exclusive access to the most valuable goods. A raider destroys his own market, burn too many monasteries, and the survivors will move their treasures beyond your reach. The mathematics of commerce prove compelling. A successful raid might yield 15 silver pieces per man after a month of dangerous voyaging. But a trading expedition to Constantinople, carrying amber and furs south and returning with silk and spices, can generate profits of 30 pieces or more per crew member, with far less risk of violent death. You have participated in both types of venture now, and the differences are stark. Raiders must travel light and fast, carrying only weapons and basic supplies, striking quickly before defenses can be organized. Merchants, by contrast, can take their time, following established routes and stopping at known ports where local rulers guarantee safe passage in exchange for customs duties and trading fees. The social dynamics differ as well. A raiding crew bonds through shared danger and the primitive democracy of men who must trust each other with their lives. A merchant crew develops different relationships, still close, still dependent on mutual cooperation, but based more on shared profits than shared blood. The violence that binds warriors together gives way to the calculating cooperation of men pursuing common economic interests. Yet the skills transfer readily from one pursuit to the other. The seamanship that guides a longship through hostile waters serves equally well on peaceful trading voyages. The weather sense that warns of storms benefits merchant and raider alike. Even the combat skills prove useful, for pirates and bandits threaten trade routes just as surely as they threaten wealthy monasteries. Some of your old crewmates have followed Ragnar into the merchant trade, adapting their talents to this new form of voyaging. Eric One-Eye serves as quartermaster for the trading fleet, his experience in evaluating plunder proving equally valuable when assessing foreign goods for potential profit. Beyond the Younger has discovered an unexpected talent for languages, learning enough Arabic and Greek to negotiate directly with foreign merchants rather than relying on interpreters. Others have found different paths. Gunnar Eriksson used his share of raid profits to purchase a farm where he raises cattle and grows barley like his father before him. But even he cannot entirely escape the pull of the sea. Each spring finds him hiring out his crew for one expedition or another, drawn by memories of fellowship and adventure that no amount of domestic contentment can entirely replace. The transformation extends beyond individual careers to reshape entire communities. Hedeby itself has grown from a modest trading post to a cosmopolitan city where Norse merchants rub shoulders with Slavic traders, Frankish craftsmen, and Arab scholars. The streets echo with a dozen languages, while the market stalls offer goods from regions that exist only as names in the sagas of earlier generations. The local Jarl has grown rich on customs duties and trading fees, using his wealth to build a hall that rivals those of kings and to maintain a war band that discourages both foreign invasion and domestic rebellion. But his power rests on commerce rather than conquest, on his ability to maintain the peace and stability that allow merchants to operate safely rather than on his prowess in battle. Christianity spreads along the trade routes like seeds carried by the wind, not through force of arms. The Muslims who control much of the silk and spice trade would hardly tolerate Christian missionaries among their number, but through the gradual influence of merchants who find the new religion's emphasis on honest dealing and contractual obligations well suited to commercial life. You notice the changes in yourself as well. The young warrior who first sailed with Ragnar was motivated primarily by the desire for wealth and reputation, caring little for the means by which they were achieved. The merchant you have become still values both, but understands that sustainable prosperity requires different methods than temporary gain. The silver armband that was your first share of raid plunder has been joined by others, purchased rather than stolen, earned through honest trade rather than violent seizure. They represent not just wealth, but a new understanding of how wealth is created and preserved. The old ways brought quick profits, but limited opportunities. The new ways promise sustained prosperity for those clever enough to master their complexities. Yet something is lost in the transformation as well. The brotherhood forged in battle, the exhilaration of victory against desperate odds, the sense of living entirely in the present moment when death might arrive with the next enemy charge. These experiences leave marks that no amount of peaceful prosperity can entirely erase. Standing on the Hedeby dock as another trading season begins, you wonder if this is how the world changes. Not through dramatic events that mark clear endings and beginnings, but through the gradual accumulation of individual choices that collectively transform the nature of an entire civilization. The age of raiding is not over, but it is no longer the only path to wealth and status. The old gods still watch from Asgard, but their attention increasingly turns to different forms of worthy deeds. Odin values wisdom as much as warfare, and what greater wisdom is there than learning to prosper without destroying? Thor protects farmers and merchants as readily as he guards warriors, for all honest work deserves divine protection. The wind that fills your sails now carries more than the promise of adventure. It bears the seeds of a new world where swords might be beaten into plowshares and dragon ships into merchant vessels. You are no longer just a Viking raider. You are becoming something unprecedented in the history of your people. A man of peace who remembers war, a merchant who was forged in battle, a bridge between what was and what might yet be. The settlement of Reykjavik spreads before you like a testament to human adaptability. Its turf-roofed houses, clustered around a harbor that steams with geothermal springs even in the depths of winter. You have come to Iceland not as a raider seeking plunder, but as a farmer seeking land, part of the great migration that is transforming the northern Atlantic from an empty wasteland into the foundation of a new civilization. 3 years have passed since you last swung a sword in anger. 3 years spent learning the merchant's trade and accumulating the wealth necessary for this ultimate venture. The land you claim here will be purchased with honest silver rather than seized by force, but the skills that served you as a warrior, courage, adaptability, the ability to thrive in hostile environments, prove equally valuable in this enterprise. The journey from Norway took 6 weeks. Your na heavy with livestock, tools, seeds, and the accumulated possessions of 30 families seeking new homes in a land that exists more in hope than in geographical reality. Women and children huddled in the ship's belly while men worked the oars and sails, but all shared the same dream of prosperity in a place where land is abundant and social status depends more on individual achievement than on inherited privilege. Ingolf Arnason, the settlement's founder, greets new arrivals with the mixture of welcome and calculation that marks successful colonists everywhere. Iceland offers opportunities unknown in the crowded fjords of Norway, but it also presents challenges that claim the lives of those unprepared for its unique demands. The land is rich and fertile, watered by glacial streams and warmed by underground fires. But the winters are brutal and the isolation complete. Success here, Ingolf explains as he guides you through the settlement, depends on forgetting much of what you learned in the homeland. The techniques that work in Norway's forests often fail in Iceland's treeless valleys. The crops that flourish in familiar soil may wither in volcanic earth. Even the gods themselves seem different in this land of fire and ice. The observation proves more prophetic than you initially realize. The Christian missionaries who occasionally reach Iceland find fertile ground among colonists who have left behind the familiar shrines and sacred groves of their ancestors. The new religion's emphasis on personal salvation and universal brotherhood appeals to men and women struggling to build communities where old tribal loyalties mean little. But the transition is neither immediate nor complete. The old gods retain their power over hearts that remember their protection during dangerous voyages and desperate battles. Thor's hammer still guards many households, while Odin's ravens continue to serve as omens of fortune, good and ill. The result is a unique religious synthesis that would horrify Orthodox believers on both sides. You establish your farmstead in a valley where hot springs provide both warmth and the means to forge iron tools essential for survival. The land is free. Iceland has no kings or jarls to claim ownership of empty territories, but making it productive requires backbreaking labor and careful planning. Every tree must be planted, every field cleared of volcanic rock, every building constructed from materials that must be quarried or imported. The social structure that emerges reflects the practical egalitarianism forced by frontier conditions. The Althing, Iceland's governing assembly, recognizes no hereditary nobility and grants no special privileges to those who were powerful in the old country. Disputes are settled by law rather than force, with elaborate procedures for compensation and arbitration that would seem impossibly complex to warriors accustomed to solving problems with swords. Your nearest neighbor is Gudrun Eriksdottir, a widow whose husband died during the voyage from Norway, but who refused to return to a homeland where she would be dependent on relatives' charity. Her farm prospers through a combination of shrewd management and innovations adapted to local conditions. Sheep whose thick wool provides protection against Iceland's winds. Storage techniques that preserve food through winters that last 6 months. Building methods that use turf and stone to create structures warmer than timber halls. The relationship that develops between your households illustrates the new social patterns emerging in this frontier society. Marriage negotiations involve considerations of land ownership, resource sharing, and mutual defense that would seem foreign to Norwegian customs based on family alliance and social status. When you finally wed, after 2 years of careful courtship, the ceremony combines Christian prayers with older rituals that invoke the fertility god's blessing on your union. The children born in Iceland represent something unprecedented in the history of your people. Norsemen who have never seen the homeland, whose loyalty belongs entirely to the land of their birth rather than to ancestral territories across the sea. They speak Norwegian as their first language but adapt it to local conditions, developing new words for phenomena that exist nowhere else on earth. They worship gods both old and new, seeing no contradiction in seeking Thor's protection during storms while attending Christian Mass on feast days. Trade connections with Europe remain vital to the colony's survival. Iceland produces little that European markets demand. Dried fish, woolen cloth, and falcons prized by wealthy nobles for hunting, but requires constant imports of iron, grain, and luxury goods that make life bearable during the long, dark winters. The merchant skills you developed in earlier years prove invaluable in maintaining these essential commercial relationships. The sagas that preserve Icelandic history are already taking shape in the mouths of poets and storytellers who transform everyday events into epic narratives worthy of the gods' attention. Your own journey, from Viking raider to peaceful farmer, becomes part of this larger story. Proof that men can change as radically as the societies they create. But change comes with loss as well as gain. The warrior culture that shaped your youth seems increasingly distant from the realities of Icelandic life, where success depends more on skill with plow and loom than with sword and shield. Your children learn the old stories, but lack the experiences that gave them meaning. They know Thor as a god who protects farmers rather than warriors, Odin as a source of wisdom rather than battle fury. Standing on your farmstead's hill as another brief Arctic summer draws to its close, you watch the northern lights dance across skies that stretch unbroken to the edge of the world. This is not the homeland your ancestors knew, and you are not the man you once were. But perhaps that is the price of building something new. The willingness to let go of what was in order to create what might yet be. The land accepts your offerings of labor and dedication, returning harvests sufficient to sustain life and hope for the future. The gods, whether old or new, seem to smile upon this venture in human adaptability. Iceland is becoming home, and you are becoming Icelandic, part of a grand experiment in what Vikings might become when they stop raiding and start building. The scars tell their own story, written in the pale lines that crisscross your weathered skin, like a map of battles fought and survived. 20 years have passed since you first sailed with Ragnar Ironarm. 20 years that have transformed you from an eager youth seeking glory into a grizzled veteran who understands the true cost of the warrior's path. Your left shoulder aches constantly now, the legacy of a Frankish spear that punched through mail and muscle during a raid on the Seine. The break healed badly, leaving you unable to raise that arm above your head. A disability that forced your retirement from active raiding years before age alone would have demanded it. The compensation paid by your crewmates helped purchase your Icelandic farm, but no amount of silver can restore the easy movement of youth. Eric One Eye visits your steading on a grey autumn morning, his own body bearing testimony to 3 decades of warfare and adventure. The patch that covers his missing eye has become so familiar that children born since his injury cannot imagine him any other way. But you remember when that socket held a bright blue orb that could spot enemy sails on the horizon hours before anyone else. The dreams still come, he confesses, as you share ale beside your hearth, watching flames dance in the fireplace while wind howls across the Icelandic moor. Not every night now, thank the gods, but often enough. Always the same one, that monastery in Northumbria where young Thorvald took the arrow through his throat. I hear him calling for his mother as the blood bubbles through his lips. You nod understanding, for your own sleep is troubled by similar visitations. The faces of men you have killed appear in the darkest hours before dawn, not accusatory, but simply present, reminding you that every action carries consequences that echo through eternity. Brother Augustine, the elderly monk whose dignity remained intact even as his world burned around him. The Frankish knight who fought bravely but hopelessly against overwhelming odds. The young Irish warrior whose last words were a prayer to a god you did not recognize. The physical wounds are easier to bear than the invisible ones. Your shoulder will never heal completely, but it no longer threatens your life as it did during the fevered weeks when infection fought with your constitution for possession of your body. The memories, however, seem to grow more vivid rather than less, as if age has stripped away the protective calluses that once shielded your conscience from their impact. Beyond the younger, no longer young at 35, arrives as the afternoon light begins to fade. His own journey to your farm, motivated by the same restless need for connection that drives all old warriors to seek the company of those who share their experiences. His beard is gray now, and his eyes hold depths that were not there when he first gripped an oar with trembling hands. I tried to explain it to my son, he says, settling onto a bench worn smooth by years of use. What it was like in the old days when we sailed beyond the edge of the world seeking our fortunes. But how do you describe the feeling of a ship lifting beneath your feet in a heavy sea? The weight of a sword in your hand when death walks the deck beside you? The taste of fear and excitement mixed together like wine and water. The conversation that follows is one you have shared many times before, with different combinations of survivors from crews that sailed together into legend. It serves a necessary purpose, this ritual remembering, for there are experiences that can only be understood by those who have lived through them. The brotherhood forged in battle extends beyond the grave, connecting the living with the dead in bonds that neither time nor distance can sever. Your wife, Gudrun, listens from her loom in the corner, her hands never ceasing their work, even as her attention focuses on stories she has heard before, but never tires of hearing again. She understands that these tales serve as both entertainment and therapy, allowing men to process experiences too intense for ordinary conversation. Tell about the storm off the Orkney Islands, she requests, knowing that this particular story always ends with laughter, despite its terrifying beginning. The one where Ragnar lost his lucky hammer pendant. The tale that follows is both true and mythologized, polished by countless retellings until it shines like silver in firelight. But underneath the humor and adventure lies a deeper truth about men who chose to risk everything in pursuit of goals that seem almost incomprehensible to those who have never felt the sea's call. The younger generation listens with the fascination of children hearing fairy tales, unable to fully grasp that their fathers and grandfathers once lived in a world where such adventures were commonplace. Your own sons show polite interest, but lack the context that would make the stories meaningful. They are farmers and craftsmen, builders rather than destroyers, and perhaps that is as it should be. Yet something valuable is lost in the transition from one age to another. The courage that carried Viking ships across unknown oceans, the loyalty that bound oath brothers together unto death, the willingness to sacrifice everything in pursuit of worthy goals. These qualities seem less relevant in a world where success is measured by the size of harvests rather than the glory of deeds. As the evening deepens and your guests prepare to return to their own farms, you walk with them to the door and look out across the Icelandic landscape that has become your final home. The northern lights are dancing tonight, sheets of green and gold that transform the sky into a canvas worthy of the gods themselves. We were something, weren't we? Eric says quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and melancholy. Whatever else anyone might say about those days, we were something worth remembering. You grip his shoulder with your good hand, feeling the solid reality of old friendship and shared memory. We were Vikings, you reply, and in those simple words lies the whole weight of a life lived without compromise or apology. We were Vikings, and the world remembers. The price of the sword has been high, higher than any young warrior could possibly understand when he first feels the weight of steel in his hand. But it has also been worth paying, for it has purchased experiences and friendships, and a sense of having touched something larger than ordinary life. Not everyone can say they have sailed beyond the edge of the world and returned to tell the tale. The wind carries the scent of snow from the glaciers that crown Iceland's mountains, reminding you that another winter approaches and that your own winter is not far behind. But tonight the fire burns bright, the ale flows freely, and the stories live on in the voices of men who remember when the world was younger and the sea held infinite possibilities. The great assembly at Stamford Bridge will be remembered not for the words spoken, but for the silence that follows the news from England. Harold Hardrada, the last of the great Viking kings, lies dead on foreign soil, his magnificent army scattered by Saxon ferdmen who fought like demons to protect their homeland. The age of the Sea Kings is ending not with the thunder of war drums, but with the quiet recognition that the world has changed beyond recovery. You stand among the crowd of jarls and ship captains gathered to hear the survivors' tales, watching as weathered faces register the implications of defeat on such a massive scale. These are men who have spent their lives believing in the invincibility of Viking arms, the superiority of northern courage over southern weakness. The death of Hardrada shatters assumptions that have shaped Norse strategy for 2 centuries. Olaf Kyrre, Harald's son and successor to what remains of the Norwegian crown, speaks with the careful, measured words of a man who understands that he inherits diminished power in a changed world. The old ways, he says, his voice carrying clearly across the assembly ground, have served us well for many generations. But the kingdoms of the south grow stronger while we grow weaker through constant warfare among ourselves. The mathematics of decline are stark and undeniable. England, once the richest source of Viking plunder, has unified under strong kings who maintain professional armies rather than relying on local militias. France has organized itself into a patchwork of fortified territories where every strategic river crossing is guarded by stone castles that can withstand months of siege. Even Ireland, long the favorite target of Norse raiders, has learned to coordinate resistance and fortify its monasteries against attack. But perhaps more importantly, the economic foundation that once made raiding profitable has shifted beneath the Vikings' feet. The silver mines of the Harz Mountains are exhausted, reducing the flow of precious metal that once made European monasteries and trading towns such attractive targets. The rise of the Italian maritime republics has established new trade routes that bypass traditional Viking commercial networks. The wealth is still there, but it is better protected and harder to reach. The transformation extends beyond military and economic factors to touch the very heart of Viking society. Christianity has spread throughout Scandinavia, not through conquest, but through the gradual recognition that the new religion offers advantages in dealing with increasingly Christian neighbors. Kings who once wore Thor's hammer around their necks now display golden crosses, while their courts employ Christian scribes who can correspond with foreign rulers in Latin rather than runes. Your own grandson epitomizes the changes reshaping Northern society. Educated by priests rather than warriors, he speaks French and Latin as easily as Norse, and his interests run toward law and theology rather than warfare and adventure. When you tell him stories of the great raids, he listens with the polite attention due to an honored grandfather, but his questions reveal concerns that would have been incomprehensible to your generation. Was it not wrong, he asks after hearing the tale of your first monastery raid, to take by force what belonged to innocent men? Did not their God deserve the same respect you demanded for your own? The questions are painful because they admit no easy answers. The worldview that once made raiding seem not just acceptable, but admirable. The belief that courage in battle justified almost any action, that the gods favored those bold enough to seize what they wanted, no longer commands universal acceptance even among your own descendants. The longships themselves reflect the broader transformation of Viking society. The new vessels emerging from Scandinavian shipyards are designed for trade rather than war, with deeper hulls and larger cargo capacity, sacrificed for the shallow draft and speed that made the classic dragon ships so effective in combat. Even the decorative elements have changed. Where once fierce dragon heads glared from stems and sterns, now merchants prefer simpler designs that will not frighten potential customers. Ragnar Ironarm, now past his 60th year and wealthy beyond the dreams of his youth, has become a patron of churches rather than a leader of raiders. His donations fund the construction of stone cathedrals, where once he would have led expeditions to plunder their wooden predecessors. The transformation seems natural to him, a logical evolution from warrior to merchant to respected elder. But it symbolizes changes that extend far beyond individual biography. The world grows smaller, he observes during one of your increasingly rare meetings, and more civilized. There are fewer places where a man can sail beyond the horizon and find lands untouched by law or custom. The age of exploration is ending, replaced by an age of administration and incremental profit. The observation contains its own sadness. for it acknowledges the passing of something that can never be recovered. The sense of infinite possibility that once drove Vikings to sail beyond the edge of known maps. The belief that courage and determination could overcome any obstacle. The brotherhood forged in facing death together on foreign shores. These experiences become rarer as the world settles into more predictable patterns. Yet not everything is lost in the transition. The descendants of Viking raiders now rule kingdoms in England, France, Sicily, and Russia, their blood mixed with that of the peoples they once conquered. The democratic traditions that governed Viking assemblies influenced the development of representative institutions throughout Northern Europe. The maritime technologies perfected by Norse shipwrights enable the exploration and colonization of lands that exist beyond even Viking imagination. Standing on the shore where you first learned to handle an oar, watching the sun set over waters that once carried your people to adventures in every direction, you reflect on the strange circularity of history. Your grandfather spoke of a time before the great raids began, when Norsemen were farmers and fishermen, content with the narrow horizons of Scandinavian fjords. Perhaps your grandson will live to see such times again, when the children of sea wolves turn their energies to tending flocks and building cities rather than seeking glory across the whale roads. The twilight of the longships is not an ending, but a transformation. The metamorphosis of a civilization that has learned to prosper through means other than warfare. The courage that once carried Vikings into battle now builds cathedrals and establishes laws. The loyalty that bound war bands together now creates merchant partnerships and political alliances. The hunger for adventure that drove men across unknown seas now seeks fulfillment in scholarship, craftsmanship, and the patient work of building lasting institutions. The old gods are not dead, but they speak more quietly now, their voices lost in the tolling of church bells and the rustling of parchment in scriptoriums where monks preserve the very sagas that celebrate their pagan predecessors. The wheel turns, as it always has and always will, carrying human dreams from one age to another in the endless cycle of creation and destruction and renewal. The archaeological dig at Reb unfolds like a conversation with ghosts, each carefully excavated artifact offering fragments of a story that Hollywood has obscured with myth and melodrama. You kneel in the Danish soil where Vikings once walked, watching as modern scholars use trowels and brushes to resurrect a reality far more complex and fascinating than any stereotype could capture. The first surprise lies in what is not found. The horned helmets that have become synonymous with Viking imagery in popular culture exist nowhere in the archaeological record. The few ceremonial examples discovered in much earlier contexts suggest ritual rather than military use, while practical war helmets followed the simple bowl design favored by warriors from Britain to Byzantium. The Vikings were pragmatists first and foremost, and pragmatists do not encumber themselves with headgear designed to catch enemy weapons. Professor Hansen, the expedition's leader, holds up a fragment of what appears to be ordinary pottery, but represents something far more significant: evidence of the extensive trade networks that connected Scandinavia to the wider world centuries before the Great Raids began. The clay was fired in a kiln in the Rhineland, then carried north to Denmark, where it contained goods that have long since crumbled to dust. This changes everything we thought we knew about pre-Viking Scandinavia, she explains, her voice tight with excitement. These people were not isolated barbarians who suddenly discovered seafaring in the 8th century. They were cosmopolitan traders whose commercial networks stretched from the Arctic to the Mediterranean. The excavation reveals layer upon layer of evidence for a society far more sophisticated than the popular image suggests. Gaming pieces carved from walrus ivory and amber testify to leisure activities that required considerable skill and artistry. Fragments of silk fabric prove that luxury goods from distant lands reached even modest households. Most surprisingly, chemical analysis of human remains reveals dietary diversity that included spices from Asia and wine from Mediterranean vineyards. The weapons discovered in the dig tell their own story of technological sophistication and careful craftsmanship. Viking swords were not crude clubs, but precision instruments whose blades incorporated steel of remarkable quality, often imported from the Frankish kingdoms or even from as far away as India. The complex pattern welding techniques used in their construction required skills that took years to master and resources that spoke to substantial wealth. But perhaps most revealing are the personal possessions that humanize these ancient warriors. Combs carved with intricate designs, jewelry that reveals both artistic sensibility and considerable disposable income, children's toys that speak to family life and emotional bonds that Hollywood Vikings never seemed to possess. These were not savage raiders, motivated solely by bloodlust, but complex human beings whose culture valued beauty, craftsmanship, and the bonds of kinship. The burials uncovered at Ribe challenge another persistent myth: the image of Viking women as passive victims waiting at home while their men sought glory abroad. The grave goods associated with female skeletons include not just domestic implements, but also scales and weights that indicate participation in commercial activities, weapons that suggest some women may have fought alongside men, and precious items that reveal substantial personal wealth and social status. One burial in particular captures the imagination. A woman in her 30s, interred with a full set of merchant scales, silver arm rings from Ireland, amber beads from the Baltic, and a small but beautifully crafted seax that shows signs of regular use. Her skeleton bears evidence of extensive travel. Isotope analysis of her teeth indicates childhood in one region, adolescence in another, adult years in a third. She was a Viking in the truest sense, a wanderer who found opportunity and prosperity far from her birthplace. The settlement patterns revealed by excavation paint a picture of communities far more organized and permanent than the nomadic raiders of popular imagination. The longhouses are substantial structures designed for extended occupation, with evidence of careful planning and skilled construction. Storage facilities indicate surplus production and long-term planning. Workshop areas show specialized craft production that required significant investment in tools and training. Most surprisingly, the evidence suggests that many Viking-age settlements were remarkably cosmopolitan places where Scandinavians lived alongside Slavs, Celts, Anglo-Saxons, and even occasional visitors from much more distant lands. The pottery styles, architectural techniques, and burial customs show constant cultural exchange and adaptation rather than the ethnic purity that modern misconceptions often assume. The rune stones scattered throughout Scandinavia provide their own corrective to popular mythology. Rather than celebrating only martial prowess, they commemorate a wide range of achievements: successful trading voyages, engineering projects like bridge building, patronage of Christian churches, and even what appears to be early conservation efforts to protect forests and wildlife. The picture that emerges is of a society that valued diverse forms of accomplishment and contribution. Dr. Lindqvist, a specialist in runic inscriptions, translates one particularly revealing example. Asgrim had the stone raised in memory of Ulf, his son, who died in the east in Garda. May God help his soul. Asgrim carved the runes. The inscription reveals multiple layers of cultural complexity. A Scandinavian name using a Christian prayer while commemorating someone who died in what is now Russia, all recorded in an indigenous writing system that shows clear influence from both Latin and Greek models. The DNA evidence emerging from Viking Age skeletal remains provides perhaps the most dramatic revision of traditional assumptions. The genetic diversity within Viking communities was extraordinary, with clear evidence of ancestry from across Europe and beyond. These were not ethnically homogeneous populations, but cosmopolitan communities that integrated people from many backgrounds into a shared cultural identity based on lifestyle and values rather than bloodline. Standing in the Ribe excavation as another day's work concludes, watching the sun set over the same landscape where Vikings once lived and worked and dreamed, you're struck by the profound disconnect between historical reality and popular imagination. The real Vikings were more interesting than their fictional counterparts, more complex, more sophisticated, more human. They were farmers and traders as much as warriors, explorers and settlers as much as raiders, artists and craftsmen as much as destroyers. They created literature and law, art and architecture, commercial networks and democratic institutions. They were, in short, recognizably modern people facing the universal human challenges of survival, prosperity, and meaning in a dangerous and uncertain world. The ghosts in the Danish mist whisper truths that are more fascinating than any fiction, reminding us that history belongs not to the mythmakers, but to the patient scholars who listen carefully to what the evidence actually reveals. The real Vikings await discovery in every excavation, every translation, every careful analysis of material remains. They deserve to be remembered as they actually were, rather than as we have imagined them to be. What drives a human being to leave everything familiar behind and sail into the unknown? This question echoes across the centuries as we attempt to understand the motivations that transformed Scandinavian farmers into the most feared and admired seafarers of their age. The answer, when we strip away the accumulated layers of myth and romance, reveals something fundamental about the human condition itself. Stand for a moment on the shores of Lake Superior, where Ojibwe tradition speaks of visitors from across the great water who came in long boats flying striped sails. The description matches no known vessel save the Viking longship, suggesting that Norse explorers may have penetrated far deeper into the North American continent than any written record indicates. If true, this represents not just remarkable seamanship, but an almost incomprehensible hunger for discovery that drove men beyond the very edge of the possible. The archaeological evidence grows stronger each year. Lonceau Meadows in Newfoundland provides undisputed proof that Vikings established settlements in North America 5 centuries before Columbus. But newer discoveries, a Norse coin in Maine, possible ship rivets in the Canadian Arctic, genetic markers in isolated Inuit populations, hint at expeditions that may have reached the Pacific Ocean through the Arctic archipelago. These achievements become even more remarkable when we consider the technology available to Viking navigators. No magnetic compass guided their voyages. No accurate charts marked the hazards they would encounter. No weather forecasting warned of approaching storms. They sailed by sun and star, and the subtle signs written in wave patterns and bird behavior, trusting their lives to knowledge accumulated through generations of careful observation and deadly trial and error. But technology alone cannot explain the Viking expansion. Other medieval peoples possessed seaworthy vessels and navigational skills without feeling compelled to explore beyond familiar horizons. The Chinese treasure fleets of the early 15th century were larger and more sophisticated than any Viking longship. Yet they turned inward after brief experiments with long-range voyaging. The Arabs developed advanced mathematical navigation techniques but focused their maritime energies on established trade routes rather than pure exploration. The answer lies deeper than mere technical capability, in the cultural and psychological factors that shaped Scandinavian society during the crucial centuries of expansion. The inheritance laws that left younger sons without land, the harsh climate that made survival uncertain, the political fragmentation that offered ambitious men limited opportunities for advancement. All these pressures combined to create a population primed for emigration and adventure. Yet millions of people throughout history have faced similar circumstances without producing anything comparable to the Viking phenomenon. The crucial difference lies in the particular combination of values and beliefs that characterized Norse culture. The emphasis on individual reputation over material comfort, the conviction that worthy deeds could grant a form of immortality through song and story, the religious framework that celebrated courage in the face of impossible odds. Consider the saga of Egil Skallagrimsson, whose poetry reveals a man driven not by simple greed, but by complex psychological needs that could only be satisfied through constant testing of his abilities against increasingly difficult challenges. His raids and battles serve as metaphors for the internal struggle between the desire for security and the hunger for transcendence that defines the human condition itself. The women of the Viking Age participated in this cultural ethos as fully as the men, though their roles have been obscured by later medieval prejudices that could not comprehend female warriors and explorers. Gudrid Thorbjarnardottir traveled from Iceland to Greenland to Vinland, and possibly beyond, giving birth to the first European child born in the New World. Her grandson became a bishop, suggesting that exploration and settlement, rather than mere raiding, motivated these extraordinary voyages. The psychological profile that emerges from careful study of the sagas and archaeological evidence reveals people driven by what modern psychologists might recognize as a need for self-actualization, the desire to discover and develop their full potential as human beings. The Viking expansion represents not just territorial conquest, but a form of collective self-discovery, an attempt to answer the fundamental question of what human beings might accomplish when freed from conventional limitations. This interpretation helps explain why Viking culture produced not just warriors and explorers, but also poets and lawmakers, craftsmen and merchants, scholars and diplomats. The same restless energy that drove long ships across uncharted seas also created the Icelandic Commonwealth with its innovative legal system, the narrative masterpieces that became the foundation of European literature, and commercial networks that connected the Arctic with the Mediterranean. The religious transformation that marked the end of the Viking Age represents not abandonment of these values, but their evolution into forms better suited to a changing world. The courage that once carried warriors into battle was redirected toward the challenges of building stable societies. The hunger for exploration found new outlets in intellectual and spiritual quests. The loyalty that bound ship crews together became the foundation for political and commercial institutions. But something essential was preserved through all these transformations: the conviction that human life should be lived to its fullest extent, that worthy goals justify extraordinary risks, that the boundaries of the possible exist only to be transcended by those bold enough to challenge them. This is the eternal voyage that began in Scandinavian fjords but has never truly ended. We see it reflected in the descendants of Viking settlers who became the explorers of later ages. The Norwegian polar expeditions of Nansen and Amundsen, the Icelandic astronauts who carry Nordic names into space, the Danish entrepreneurs who pushed the boundaries of sustainable technology. The same restless spirit that once drove long ships into unknown waters now propels human consciousness toward new frontiers of understanding and achievement. The philosophical implications extend far beyond Scandinavian culture. The Viking example demonstrates that geographical expansion and spiritual growth are intimately connected, that the willingness to venture into physical unknowns creates the mental flexibility necessary for intellectual and moral development. The societies that turned inward, that chose security over adventure, tradition over innovation, often stagnated, while those that embraced uncertainty and change continued to evolve. Modern neuroscience suggests that the human brain is literally rewired by novel experiences, that exposure to unfamiliar environments and challenges creates new neural pathways that enhance cognitive flexibility and creative problem solving. The Vikings, without understanding the biological mechanisms involved, intuitively grasped this connection between physical exploration and mental development. Their legal innovations provide striking examples of this phenomenon. The Icelandic Althing, established by Viking settlers in 930 CE, pioneered concepts of representative government and rule of law that would not appear elsewhere in Europe for centuries. These advances emerged directly from the practical challenges of organizing communities composed of refugees from diverse backgrounds who could not rely on traditional tribal authorities for governance. Similarly, the narrative techniques developed by saga writers reflected the psychological complexity that comes from living between multiple worlds, pagan and Christian, Scandinavian and European, traditional and innovative. The best sagas achieve a sophisticated understanding of human motivation and moral ambiguity that rivals anything in world literature, precisely because their authors had experienced the disorientation and growth that comes from constant cultural boundary crossing. The economic implications of the Viking expansion continue to influence global development patterns. The trade networks established by Norse merchants created the first truly international markets in medieval Europe, connecting raw materials from the Arctic with manufactured goods from the Mediterranean in commercial relationships that prefigured modern globalization. The entrepreneurial spirit that drove these innovations, the willingness to risk everything on ventures with uncertain outcomes, remains the foundation of economic dynamism. But perhaps most importantly, the Viking phenomenon demonstrates that human potential is far greater than most societies allow their members to discover. The young farmers who became master navigators, the craftsmen who became international merchants, the warriors who became lawmakers and poets. Their transformations suggest that conventional social roles often represent artificial limitations rather than natural boundaries. The question of what drove the Vikings ultimately becomes a question about what drives any individual or culture toward greatness rather than mediocrity. The answer appears to lie in the cultivation of certain attitudes and values: curiosity about the unknown, courage in the face of uncertainty, loyalty to chosen companions, and perhaps, most crucially, the belief that life should be an adventure rather than merely a survival strategy. These values remain as relevant today as they were 1,000 years ago. In an era when technological change creates constant uncertainty and global challenges demand innovative solutions, the Viking example offers both inspiration and practical guidance. Their success came not from superior resources or favorable circumstances, but from the conscious choice to embrace difficulty rather than avoid it, to view obstacles as opportunities for growth rather than excuses for retreat. The eternal voyage continues in every laboratory where scientists probe the mysteries of existence, every startup where entrepreneurs risk everything on untested ideas, every expedition that pushes human presence into previously unreachable environments. The spirit that drove longships across the North Atlantic now powers rovers across Martian landscapes and deep-sea vehicles into oceanic trenches. Standing at the edge of your own unknown sea, whether literal or metaphorical, you can still hear the echo of oars cutting through dark water, still feel the pool of horizons that promise discovery and transformation for those brave enough to pursue them. The Vikings mapped the geography of their world, but more importantly, they mapped the geography of human possibility. Their legacy challenges every generation to ask, what undiscovered countries of mind and spirit await exploration? What new forms of courage and loyalty and achievement might emerge from venturing beyond the comfortable boundaries of the familiar? What would you risk to discover who you might become if you chose adventure over security, growth over stagnation, the eternal voyage over the safe harbor? The answer, like the ocean itself, remains vast and mysterious and eternally beckoning to those who have ears to hear its call. The morning mist rises from Geiranger Fjord like the breath of sleeping giants, transforming the Norwegian landscape into something halfway between memory and dream. You stand on the same cliffs where your ancestors once watched for returning longships, feeling the weight of centuries pressing against your consciousness, like the accumulated silence of deep water. 1,000 years have passed since the last dragon ship departed these shores on voyages of conquest and discovery. Yet something essential remains unchanged. The sea still stretches toward infinite horizons, still whispers promises of adventure to those willing to listen. The mountains still stand as eternal witnesses to human ambition and folly, their snow-crowned peaks reaching toward skies that have watched the rise and fall of empires with divine indifference. Below you, a modern cruise ship glides through waters that once carried Viking raiders toward distant shores. Its passengers are pilgrims of a sort, seeking connection with a past that seems both alien and familiar, drawn by legends that have grown larger than the historical realities they supposedly commemorate. They come expecting to find savages in horned helmets, but discover instead the complexity of human beings who face the same fundamental challenges that confront every generation. The contradiction seems fitting, for the Viking legacy has always existed more powerfully in imagination than in simple historical fact. The sagas that preserve their memory transform ordinary events into mythological narratives, while archaeological discoveries reveal prosaic details that humanize figures who once seemed superhuman. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between legend and reality, in the space where human experience transcends the boundaries of time and culture. Dr. Sarah Michelson, a marine archaeologist whose work has revolutionized understanding of Viking seafaring, stands beside you on the cliff top, her instruments recording wind patterns and current flows that remain essentially unchanged since the medieval period. Her research has demonstrated that the navigational achievements attributed to Norse explorers were not only possible but inevitable given their remarkable understanding of ocean dynamics and celestial mechanics. They were scientists, she observes, watching her instruments track phenomena invisible to untrained eyes, though they would not have recognized the term. Every successful voyage required careful observation, accurate measurement, and testable hypotheses about weather patterns and seasonal variations. The difference between their science and ours is one of method rather than fundamental approach. The observation illuminates something crucial about the Viking achievement. These were not mysterious, superhuman figures guided by supernatural powers, but recognizably modern people who applied intelligence and determination to seemingly impossible challenges. Their success came from the same qualities that drive scientific and technological progress today: curiosity about the unknown, willingness to test assumptions against reality, and the courage to act on incomplete information when action is required. The genetic legacy of the Viking expansion has been traced through modern DNA analysis, revealing the extraordinary scope of their influence on subsequent human development. Scottish Islands retained clear Scandinavian genetic markers 11 centuries after the last Norse settlements were abandoned. Russian aristocratic families carry chromosomal evidence of Varangian ancestors who established the foundations of the Russian state. Even isolated populations in Greenland and North America show traces of Norse contact that mainstream history has only recently begun to acknowledge. But the biological inheritance represents only the most tangible aspect of a legacy that extends far beyond genetics. The democratic traditions that characterize modern Scandinavian societies trace their origins directly to the Thing assemblies, where Viking Age communities made collective decisions about law and governance. The maritime technologies that enabled European exploration of the Pacific and Indian Oceans built upon innovations perfected by Norse shipwrights 8 centuries earlier. Perhaps most importantly, the cultural values that motivated Viking expansion, individual initiative, social mobility based on achievement rather than birth, willingness to abandon familiar patterns in pursuit of opportunity, became foundational principles of what we now call Western civilization. The restless energy that drove longships beyond the horizon evolved into the spirit of scientific inquiry, commercial innovation, and political experimentation that continues to shape global development. Yet, standing on this ancient clifftop, surrounded by landscapes that seem untouched by the passage of centuries, you are struck by how much remains mysterious about the people who once called this place home. The sagas preserve their words and deeds, but cannot fully capture the subjective experience of living in a world where the boundary between natural and supernatural remained permeable, where gods walked among mortals and every decision carried cosmic significance. What did it feel like to believe that your actions in this life would determine your fate in the next? That courage in battle could literally purchase immortality. How did men and women maintain their sanity while navigating by stars and intuition across oceans that stretched beyond every known map? What internal resources sustained explorers who left familiar shores knowing they might never return, might never again see the faces of loved ones or taste the food of home? The questions resist easy answers because they probe the deepest mysteries of human motivation and endurance. The Vikings achieved what they achieved not despite their mortality, but because of it, not in ignorance of the risks they faced, but in full knowledge that death waited at the end of every voyage. Their legacy suggests that the greatest human accomplishments emerged from the conscious choice to pursue worthy goals regardless of personal cost. The sun breaks through the morning clouds, transforming the fjord into a highway of molten gold that seems to lead directly toward eternity. The metaphor feels appropriate, for the Viking achievement transcends its historical boundaries to become something universal and timeless. Every generation faces its own uncharted waters, its own impossible challenges, its own opportunities to choose between safety and adventure, stagnation and growth. The echo of their courage reaches across the centuries like the call of distant horns, reminding us that human potential remains largely unexplored, that the boundaries of the possible exist only to be transcended by those bold enough to test them. In a world that often seems dominated by cynicism and limitation, the Viking example offers a different vision, one where ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things through the simple but revolutionary act of refusing to accept conventional definitions of what can be achieved. The mist continues to rise from the dark water, carrying with it the dreams and aspirations of all who have ever looked toward the horizon and wondered what lies beyond. Somewhere in that ancient silence, the voices of long-dead warriors still echo their battle cries, their love songs, their prayers to gods both old and new. They remind us that we too are Vikings in our own way, explorers of uncharted territories that exist not just in geography, but in every unexplored possibility of human experience. The sea meets the sky where it always has, at that mystical point where the known world ends and the unknown begins. The invitation remains what it has always been: to abandon the comfortable certainties of home for the terrifying freedom of the open ocean. to discover not just new lands, but new versions of ourselves, to join the eternal voyage that began in Scandinavian fjords, but can end only when human curiosity finally exhausts the infinite mystery of existence itself. The wind carries the scent of salt and possibility, and for a moment you can almost hear them: the creak of rigging, the splash of oars, the voices of men and women who chose to live as heroes rather than die as footnotes. Their ships have long since rotted to fragments. Their bones have crumbled to dust, but their spirit remains as vital as the day they first felt the sea's call and answered it with everything they had. The Vikings await you still, not in museums or textbooks, but in every moment when you must choose between the safe path and the true one, between what is comfortable and what is possible. Their legacy is not a historical curiosity, but a living challenge. What distant shore are you sailing toward? What dragon ship carries your dreams toward the horizon, where sea meets sky? The answer lies not in the past, but in the choices you make today, tomorrow, and every day thereafter, until your own voyage reaches its appointed end. The sea is still there. The horizon still beckons. The adventure continues,